Hello, fabulous friends and fans. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah, and this is another sort of impromptu meditation exploration on some topic that is of interest to me. And this is really very impromptu on my part. Really, right now, those of you who've ordered personalized horoscopes before know that this is exactly how I do it. So I look into the camera and I look at a chart and I talk about the chart, whatever chart you want me to talk about. And I right now have been really interested in, really inspired to consider, to contemplate a topic that's been in the news. And so I was here right now doing a bunch of personalized horoscopes and I thought, why not? Why not have a look at Rachel Dolezal's chart as well? So this is a story that just recently kind of has become part of a larger conversation. And this was and is, I don't think she is anymore, but she was a woman who was the leader of a chapter of the NAACP in the United States, and recently was sort of asked on camera if she was African American. And it appears that for a long time she was saying that she was, or she was allowing people to believe that she was when she really wasn't. And so it's begun this whole conversation on a collective level about what's being called transracial, right? And when I first heard this story, when I first saw something about this, I remember the first thing I thought was Neptune in Pisces, right? That was the first thing I thought. Now that tells you a lot about me. I'm an astrologer after all. So I think Neptune in Pisces, the first thing I think. This is so Neptune in Pisces, and especially right now, as Neptune in Pisces is preparing for a series of squares with Saturn in Sagittarius, this to me is exactly the type of conversation that we will be having collectively more and more, and we will see more and more people talk about this in different ways. In this case, it is this very sort of surprising and, from her perspective, unwelcome situation that has been part of a larger conversation taking place. And some people are connecting it to transgender. Some people are saying that that's not fair. But I do want to talk about that also a little bit in light of the Neptune-Saturn square that we have coming up, and also using this as part of the impetus to explore this a little bit further as well, and to look at her chart as well. So Neptune right now is in the sign of Pisces, and Neptune ultimately, and wherever Neptune goes and wherever Neptune is in your birth chart, it represents dissolving, a dissolution. It blends, and it represents sort of merging into another as well. So it's this symbol of where things are not always very clear, or things are more influenced by spirit than by other factors necessarily. So what's happening more on a level of spirit is going to be more dominant wherever it is that Neptune is speaking in your chart. And particularly with Neptune in Pisces, now this is something that I actually wrote about when Neptune went into Pisces a few years back. You can read that article on my website. But I wrote about this because I thought that this would be really interesting from the perspective of understanding race. Neptune has been associated with the abolishment of slavery because it was discovered right around that same time. And it is a symbol of all is one. That's really what it comes down to. It's a symbol for all is one. Pisces is the sign of everyone and everything is connected. So we put that together with Neptune, and I remember writing about this, contemplating this, meditating on this, that I thought that we would be looking at race slowly but surely. We would start looking at race very differently in light of and the journey of Neptune moving through the sign of Pisces. Now, the square is coming up, and to me, this is about, and especially with Saturn being in the sign of Sagittarius. Sagittarius is belief and cultures and other places and other languages and other races. So Sag is a sign of the other. It's about understanding diversity. Saturn moving into Sagittarius is saying respect the diversity in one way. And what I mean by that is Saturn isn't about embracing. Saturn is about keeping things the way that they are. Saturn is about holding all the borders in place. Neptune is about dissolving those borders. Sagittarius is about the borders of the countries, and especially with Sagittarius, with Saturn in Sagittarius, it's about the actual borders of the different countries, separating different types of people, putting people in these different races and saying, okay, this is who you are, and this is who you are based on the skin that you were born in. And Neptune in Pisces says, that's not real. That doesn't matter. That's an illusion, is what Neptune in Pisces says. And so you bring these two planets in square, and we will be collectively as well as individually considering these very topics, considering what does it mean to be of a particular race? What does it mean to be of a particular gender? You know, just what is it that that means? Now, as I said, people are saying it's not the same thing. I'll give you an example. I recently was watching, there's this little show that I love. It's a little reality show called T.I. and Tiny, The Family Hustle. Yes, I watched that show. And T.I. is a musician, and it's about his family, and he's got this lovely family, a blended family, and they're dynamic, and I love watching them. There's just a lot of mutual respect happening there, and they're all very ambitious, so it's a nice little joy to watch. And one of the early episodes, as this series began, I remember that there was this scene where the father says to the little boy, so he has a very young son, and the father says, what is this I hear about you saying that you're white? And the son is like, I'm white. And he's like, okay, you are light skinned, but you are very much a black man. And I thought that that was a very healthy response on the part of the father. Very healthy, very normal to say that. This is a core part of your identity, especially considering all the different things that that particular identity does mean. But at the same time, I thought, we could read that and see all these like different political and what associations does this child make. Or we could also look at that, as I have seen again and again and again in children and adults. I think that our spirits are strong, and I think that our spirits have memory, and I think, and it wouldn't surprise me if that kid, because he was so young, was saying something that actually comes from a previous life. And I have watched children be born and grow up and right off the bat know things about themselves. Right off the bat say, I am of a different gender. I've seen this. And you can see that this comes from a knowledge that they have about themselves that they've come into this life with. And I've seen that in front of my very eyes. I have seen people at a very young age and even later identify very, very strongly with a culture that is not of their ancestry. And I think that this is the story of the Americas, actually. Again, Neptune square Saturn. What does it mean to be American? What does that look like? Who identifies as that? We usually, when people say American, I know I've had this experience when people ask me, my sort of automatic reaction is Canadian, because that's the most immediate way I know myself. And I've had people actually be surprised at that and be confused at that because they have a different association with my skin and my face because it represents my ancestry. Most of the times when people say American, they're thinking about somebody who's Caucasian or African American. They don't normally think about the native, really indigenous, aboriginal people of the Americas. That doesn't always come up for all people. So I think that this has to do with us redefining and re-understanding what it means, what identity means on some really core levels. And I think a part of that is that some people identify very strongly with a land that is not of that of their ancestry. And I've seen this in the astrological world especially. I have met astrologers who know so much about South Asian culture and religion and the astrology as well, who have this deep appreciation for it, have spent times, extended times, years in ashrams as well, and know a lot more about the South Asian experience than I do, but they are not South Asian. Now, of course, there are other layers to it. Of course, we can look at that as well, like what political, social station they're in and what that meant for their experiences living in India. However, these are people who've had this strong connection, a strong resonance, and I've met a lot of people who are not South Asian with a very strong spiritual connection to South Asia. Also, I have met people who are not, for example, Chinese, have a very strong connection to the language and the culture of that place. In fact, I remember meeting a woman, African-American woman, young African-American woman, and she loved all things Chinese from the time that she was really young. She was the only one in her family who was like this, confused her parents to no end, but she spoke fluent Chinese and made visits to China all the time because she loved it so much. And I loved that she could honor that. I absolutely love that we live in a time when more and more of us can say, you know what, this is something that speaks to me, and they can pursue it. Now, here's what's different with Rachel, and I can feel it, coming, people thinking it, people saying it, and I as well. I think the difference with her is, and now I'm going to dive into her chart and look at this in context of our larger lesson that we're going through, her personal journey as part of our larger lesson. But I think the difference is that she didn't own it. If she was just saying like, yes, I'm Caucasian, she could still have her hair, she could still be a professor of Africana studies. She could still do all of that and still own being Caucasian. But she was, apparently, the thing is that she was allowing some illusion to play out there. And that was her way of sort of navigating it. I think that if she had, right from the get-go, I think she would have been just as effective, been able to do everything that she still did, had her life. It's just that little piece of it. And how it actually happened was she had sort of made a report of a hate crime against her. And then that's what got the whole thing started. A newspaper decided to investigate, and then they found out, and then they confronted her, and then she didn't know what to do about it. So that's what really set it off. But if she had not taken that step, we may not even know who she is. She might not even be known outside of the group of people with whom she was trying to influence. So in terms of her social justice work, because she has a really impressive body of social justice work. So looking at her chart, okay, so now I'm diving into her chart, looking at her chart, a few things really stand out to me with this. So this whole thing kind of kicked off with her filing that report. That's really what kicked it all off. And she did that right around the time that Saturn, if I understand this correctly and I have my dates right, but still we've got, Saturn moves slow enough that we've got enough of an orb. Saturn was conjunct her Sagittarius Mercury in her chart. Now she has Mercury, Moon, Neptune conjunction in the sign of Sag, okay? People with the Moon in Sag identify with a culture as home that is other than their ancestry. So we see this with people who have Moon in the sign of Sagittarius. Usually we see this at a really young age, that they become interested in, fascinated by, really want to learn. Either it's a whole other language or immerse themselves in a whole other culture that is not that of their ancestry or not that of where it is that they grew up. So not the most sort of immediate level in which they're told to identify. She has a conjunction of these three planets in the sign of what we call a stellium in the sign of Sagittarius, including Neptune quite close to her moon, 3 degrees away from her moon. So this is about the dissolving, right? This is about her sort of, she talked in an interview about how she felt ever since she can remember, she felt a spiritual connection to what she called the Black experience. And she never identified as white. She never felt that that's what she was. She felt very early on that this was who she was, that this is what spoke to her. And I think that was very Neptune conjunct the moon, is to find that sense of very early on to find that sense of comfort and real emotional connection to the point of dissolving what you've known before and dissolving into a whole other culture. The thing is, though, Saturn doesn't really like illusions, right? Saturn doesn't accept that, okay, yeah, you feel it, so it's real. Yeah, Saturn doesn't go for that. Neptune conjunct the moon goes for that, right? And she also like sort of created some elaborate stories. That again is that Mercury involved in this conjunction. Now, I'm sure looking at this, she must be a really great speaker. She must be a great professor. She must have a way of really evoking emotions and really connecting to the culture that she's speaking about. And her passion for that culture would be really obvious with this. However, Saturn doesn't go for that. Saturn is like, no, what's the facts? You know, like, look, this is who you are. This is the material reality of what actually is. And so that right now is being challenged through her example because collectively we're experiencing this square. But in her natal chart, she was not going to be able to get away with all of that. And I don't think that it was malicious. I really, really don't. A lot of the, people are saying that she benefited from these different positions she held. Well, the positions she held that, didn't even care at the end of the day, but probably she felt that she needed to present herself as something. I don't really think it was about the position, but even so, with these positions, it turns out a lot of them were largely unpaid or it would have been irrelevant anyways. So now she's got Saturn moving along, and Saturn's not done. Saturn will, over the course of the coming year, be moving over her moon, moving over that Neptune. I think that there's still a lot more that's going to be explored in this, that this is going to become in some ways sort of a casebook study, if you will. And I definitely don't think we've heard the last of her at all, actually. I think as I look at her chart, and a lot of this also has been happening right now. She's experiencing her Pluto Square, and she's got a really tight conjunction of Pluto to her North Node in her chart. So Pluto conjunct the North Node is really, the North Node ultimately is where we're going in this life, right? It's how the universe pulls us towards greater love and greater wisdom. With Pluto, it's the life, death, rebirth cycle is a big theme as part of this. Like really transforming and becoming somebody totally different is a part of having Pluto conjunct the North Node. So she's moving in that direction as part of moving her towards greater love and greater wisdom. But Pluto is not like Neptune, right? Pluto likes the nitty gritty. Pluto wants you to be starkly honest with yourself, wants you to take ownership for every little dark secret that you hold, and is not going to let you hold it. Pluto is really about turning a thing upside down and seeing what's underneath, seeing the underbelly and seeing the beauty in that. But also Pluto is transformation. Pluto is the whole trans phenomenon, I think, is Neptune and Pluto together in general. Both of these represent the idea of trans. Whereas Neptune is happy saying, okay, yes, we can become something else, and just believing it and thinking it is enough. Pluto says, no, actually become the thing from a cellular level inside out. And so they both have in their own way to do with what we identify as trans. Uranus also, but Uranus is more about equality. Uranus more is about being yourself, being true to you and whatever that is, however you understand that to be. So Uranus plays a part in that too. But with the discovery of the outer planets, we could more and more become who it is that we were meant to be over the course of this life, right? It became an expanded way of understanding what it means to be human. And so these planets speak to an evolving understanding that we have individually and collectively as to what it is to be human and what it means to be human as well, in terms of our agency, in terms of our self-definition as well. So we have got this placement in her chart. So she is here to transform herself, be reborn from the inside out. I think she picked up on that at very young age, as she says. But I actually think that the more dominant energy in her chart has to do with the stellium she has in Sag, which speaks to her identification and how she's choosing to identify. You add to this the fact, as I started saying a little bit earlier, Pluto Square. So she's going through her Pluto Square now, right around the time that all of this started to happen. Again, right around the time of the reports as Saturn was moving towards her Mercury and to station. She experienced her first exact square to her Pluto. In fact, Pluto stationed in square a little earlier this year, again, right around the same time that Saturn was approaching and preparing to station retro on top of her Mercury. So both of these happening at the same time. Pluto Square tends to happen right around this age for a person, right around the age that she is right now, which is she's going to be 38 this year. So right around this age, 37, 38, people go through the Pluto Square. And this is part of what ushers us into midlife. So first, what happens just before this, or sometimes right around the same time as this, we have the Saturn Square. So she had and is having right now her Saturn Square. So she's experiencing that simultaneously. So either they'll happen at the same time, or sometimes Saturn will have its square before the Pluto Square. So she's having her Saturn Square simultaneously with her Pluto Square. And both of these planets, like one of these aspects is hard, but both of these are saying, okay, check in with yourself. Do you like your life? Are you being true to you? Are you being honest about your life? Are you working on the things that matter? Are you rooted in reality? Both of these placements are saying that. Are you rooted in reality? And where you are not, you are going to have to face it. You're going to have to accept it. And you're going to have to accept where things are not what you don't want them to be, so that you can then change things. When people utilize this time well, then they move forward beyond this. And eventually what happens is you get to the Uranus opposition, which is one of the final sort of midlife transits. And if you use this time well, then that happens in your early 40s. That Uranus opposition can be a time of tremendous breakthrough, tremendous progress on every front, where it comes to shining and just being you, more you, and really excelling at being you. You really do well at that time. But if you don't utilize this time well, that's when you have your midlife crisis. That's when you like get a divorce and get a sports car and dye your hair blonde and all that kind of stuff that people do, because they haven't been listening within, or they haven't been altering their life. Now, you could still do all that stuff, right? If you feel inspired to, end your marriage, get a car, dye your hair blonde. I know I'm always going through my own transformations, as regular friends and fans know over the years. Then you should do that, right? Absolutely, if that's what your spirit is calling you to do. But it's when you do that because you haven't been doing the deeper work, that's when you kind of want to pay a little bit of attention to what's really going on here. But anyways, right now it is all about not fair. Saturn Square and Pluto Square is not fair, and it feels like you can't get what you want. You can, but you've got to pay the dues to get what you want. And they're very much about reality. They're not going to let you get away with anything. So a lot of this is that reality coming to the full force for her as part of her individual journey, and as part of all of us now having a larger conversation as to how much of identity is actually fluid, right? How much of, like, how far are we going to say that, we all are one, and whatever the spirit is what is going to define our connection to everyone and everything. I personally really like that. I personally think that you should be able to be whoever it is that you feel your spirit desires you to be in this lifetime. And I say that because, and again, this is a bit of on a personal note, but I know not so much my parents. My parents are feminists. They were really cool, really political, very much the immigrant story. They wanted me to be prime minister. They groomed me for that. So that's the kind of immediate sort of environment I had. But in a larger environment, I mean, I remember a lot of times people saying to me, you know, you can't do that because you're a girl, because you're a woman, because you're South Asian, or that's not who you're supposed to be, which is really the message I got a lot. You're not supposed to be that because you're a woman or you're South Asian. And I remember knowing in my spirit right off the bat at a really young age, you don't tell me who I am. I decide who it is that I am. And that's something that has really guided my life. And I think that that's very Neptune and Sag. That is what Neptune and Sag, those of us who have Neptune and Sag, like myself, the generation, the Neptune and Sag generation, is exactly that. We decide for ourselves who we are. We are sort of redefining what it is to be of any given culture, of any given gender even as well. So this idea of whether it's transitioning or by trans, I also think about this idea of translating, right? Reinterpreting, reimagining, moving beyond also is part of what that term implies. Regardless of what identity you hold, whatever basic identity you hold, and things like race and gender are considered part of our basic identity, these are things that actually as a collective we are going to be challenging. Because on the one hand, with Saturn in Sagittarius, it's going to be like, no, it's us and them. You know, you're either this religion or you're that religion, and you can't be anything else. Well, Neptune in Pisces says, no, we're all the same. Or no, like you decide what it means to be that particular culture, that particular religion, that particular race, that particular gender. And I think that this isn't going to be the only example that we're going to see. We're already seeing more and more publicly examples of transgender, more and more publicly of now we're going to see more and more of this idea of transracial, this idea of deciding what a religion means to you, right? If people always think that it means one thing to be of a certain religion, well, actually there are like about as many ways to interpret a sacred text as there are people. And so more people are going to be looking at that and embracing that and wanting that to be recognized. So how are we going to deal with that as a collective? It's going to be part of our learning and part of the tension that's going to be taking place for us as a collective as well. Part of these really passionate questions that are going to be guiding us as well. So finally, I do want to say for Rachel Dolezal, I actually think that she can't go back to the way that things were, that's for sure. She won't be able to do the things that she did before because of this disconnect of credibility. Again, it didn't have to be that way. All that would have been required is for her to not have wanted it to be so much elusive or the illusion so much. She could have exactly been herself by just, you know, my biological parents are white. This is my dad. This is, you know, all the things that she's doing now, she could have still been doing and respected for it. However, I actually do think what's coming up for her, given her chart, given that Jupiter is going to conjunct Saturn a little bit later this year in August, that tends to be really good for people. That tends to be about really a grounding, setting in inspiration and spirit, meeting reality and really coming together in a powerful way. I also think that Jupiter on the way, and right about now, almost exactly, Jupiter is squaring her sun as well. So again, all of this stuff is coming out and she's not so clear, right? She's not coming across exactly as she would ideally like to be, and this continuation of the Pluto Square. So what was has burned away. I actually think, looking at this and the fact that Saturn is going to move into the sign of Sagittarius and begin conjuncting all those planets, I think that she's going to be working a lot. I think she's going to be talking about it a lot, this whole thing. I, have heard, and I think it makes perfect sense that she is going to be doing some reality show, or that's been offered to her. If she was my client, if she was in front of me, I would say do it. Do a reality show. Make sure, because social justice issues are really important to her, I would say make sure that like the reality show is showing you taking part in social justice issues, is showing you like sort of putting together marches and all the different ways in which she does the work that she does, make sure that the reality show covers this and talks about this, as well as being personal, as well as being an exploration of her culture and things. I think that personally for her, it really is going to end up creating the stability. It's going to turn a lot of the energy around and allow her to create greater stability through this, allow her to transform personally on a personal journey, as well as be a conduit for transformation as a collective as well. You know, she said that was always her intention, was to help elevate and help transform and to help move towards a greater sense of oneness, right, and equality among all people. And I think as part of the mystery, that's exactly what she is doing right now. That's exactly what she's going to do more of. So if she was my client, I would say, do the reality show. Do the reality show. Let people see you. Let people know you. Explore your journey in front of everybody. That's going to help us all, especially in light of this coming square, between the perfecting of this square at different points later this year and next year between Neptune and Saturn. I think that that's going to help us all to evolve that conversation, to utilize that transit well as a collective, as we come to redefine what it means to be whatever it is that you are, whatever it is that any of us is, based on our race or ethnicity or gender or social location even as well. Well, thank you so much for watching this exploration. It was just really inspired on my part. I wanted to do it, and I thought, okay, usually I do it back there on my green screen, all this stuff, but I wanted to do it a little bit more casually, right? A little bit more one-on-one with you guys. And I'm so grateful for this moment with you. Until we connect again, take care.